Kay Jowers. I'm a senior policy associate at the Nicholas Institute at Duke University and have been partnering with Communities in Partnership for about 5 years now, and with Danielle Spurlock, and I am by training an attorney and a sociologist.
Hello, my name is Danielle Spurlock. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of City and Regional Planning at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I too have been partnering with Communities in Partnership for about 5 years, and I come to the work with a background in planning and public health.
So I think for us to get started, we wanted to actually engage in a little interactive exercise. Am I correct, Kay, on that? So Kay is going to share her screen. Can you give directions, Kay? You're mute, Kay. You're mute. We do this.
In the chat at the very top, and I'm going to copy it again for you all, there is both a web link and a text option to text answers. And we just wanted to find out a little bit about who everyone is. So Cameron or Danielle, would you mind copying that web link or text number? Yeah, thank you, Hannah. You already did it. So we just want everyone to see who's in the room. If you all could just send your answer to the following question, we'll see the answers pop up here about what type of organization that you represent. Awesome. Your answers are all anonymous too. Wonderful, we have quite the variety. All right. The next thing that we wanted to ask, so we have informal organizations, anti-racist, community, nonprofit, consulting. Lots of different sectors represented and types of organizations. Next question is, who leads your organization? It can take a minute for answers to populate. We've been allowed to include stakeholder leading with facilitation, leadership team and board, flat structure, we all do. Volunteer ABCD consultants and practitioners, and then various models. Government, co-produced, me. The next question is, to whom is your organization accountable?
I see some different constituents we serve, participating communities in the chat, but really think about drilling down because we know there are many people who make up a community. There are many communities within a neighborhood. So try to be as specific as possible.
All right. The next question is, do you and your staff live in the area and or represent the community you serve? So by and large, it seems we have a mix of some do and some don't. The next question is, how about your board? And the same question, do they live in and or represent the community you serve? All right. And then the last one, before we make this turn the polls off, is where, based on what you know about Arnstein's ladder, where would you put your organization, place that your organization in that approach? And these, it is not showing it, and I apologize for that, but the answers are sort of A, B, C, D, F, going all the way down to H. All right, that one seems fairly, okay, got some more coming in, here we go. Cameron and Danielle, we can also just leave this up as people answer and get started, because this was the last sort of pre-question that we had to get to know the room a little, especially as people were joining.
Yeah, I think we can leave it here before we'll transition into an image that shows Arnstein's ladder as well as an adaptation of it, because we think it's incredibly important for us as organizations that work very closely with communities that may be community-led, to be able to place the types of engagement activities along Arnstein's ladder. Is that my feedback? Getting feedback off of someone's. But thinking through and being able, I'm just going to ask that we make sure that we do mute throughout, because with the audio on the receiving end, we'll get a lot of feedback, because we are going to have folks unmute quite a bit, because we want you to do storytelling. We have a number of stories from our experience moving and observing what's happening in Durham and Old East Durham and moving up Arnstein's ladder. But we also want to hear other stories from those who are on the call, because it allows us to hold those who have power, to hold them accountable to the types of participation that is manipulative, that does not seek to transfer power, or those types of participatory techniques that give a veneer of participation and partnership, but in truth are much farther down on the ladder. Cameron, could you speak a little bit about communities in partnership, and what are some of the initial participatory models you saw that helped motivate the creation of the organization?
Yeah, so communities in partnership came about because of an issue stemming out of trauma. We had a shooting in the neighborhood in my community. My community is located near the downtown area. It's very common right now in the United States. What's happening, which is actually happening nationally, is a lot of the city center neighborhoods, the outer ring communities of downtown communities, that have been intentional places of divestment and of, or lack of divestment, a lack of investment in those communities. And traditionally, especially within the last 60 to 70 years, generally speaking, had high populations of Black and brown and immigrant communities. My community is very reflective of that. And so we live on the outer ring on the eastern side of downtown Durham, which is right next to, some of you might know what Research Triangle Park is, where GlaxoSmithKline, a lot of the pharmaceuticals and high tech have their headquarters there, and we're sandwiched between the middle of downtown Durham and RTP. And so our community, predominantly Black, had some of the highest rates of crime in the Triangle area, as well as some of the highest rates of poverty. And so we, back in 2011, at the end of 2011, there was an unfortunate incident. There was a shooting that took place in our community. We had a large scale nonprofit organization that had partnered with the police, stated that the best remedy for us as a community, the response was for us, the answer for us was for us to board up our windows, keep our doors bolted and locked at all times. Do not let our children play in the front nor the backyards or go outside, and for us not to have any outside gatherings and to run to and from our cars. And we thought that was a wholly incomplete, unacceptable response, because we do not live in a war zone, we live in a community. And so we had gathered together, and the larger scale nonprofit started interfacing with some of us as residents, and we hosted a potluck. In January of 2012, one of our community elders stood up at the potluck and stated this was not a potluck, but at the catered event, stated it was a wonderful idea to host this. Having a catered meal is not sustainable. And we all agreed, and part of the issue was that we didn't know each other. And so we decided to start meeting and gathering, and in February of 2012, we began our first potluck with the sole purpose only of us getting to know each other, with not any lead organization, not with the intention of creating an organization to tackle a specific problem or anything of that nature. And so that began in 2012, and we, up until September of 2018, we had potlucks every month, with the exception of when we had highly inclement weather, because we have a high pedestrian community here. And so what led us during those times of potlucks, my husband and I both are asset-based community development trained facilitators, coaches, and consultants. And so at that point in time, we were as part of the community, and a lot of our neighbors had asked for us to actually help guide them in some processes where we can actually do some community listening and some activities together. And so we did that. And over the course of many years, we had block parties. We organized trunk or treat. During the Halloween season, no one was trick or treating in the neighborhood. And so that was something from our appreciative inquiry and listening, door-to-door listening, that we had found out was that people didn't feel safe enough to have their kids. And so they were all going outside of the community to trunk or treat, but they would love to be able to have something in their own neighborhood. We did some neighborhood cleanups because people were wanting the neighborhood to be cleaner. Fresh and local food was a problem. Also, there were some youth who were wanting to learn how to farm. So we helped plant an orchard as a community together in one of our faith communities' yards, and we started a neighborhood farm. We were doing a lot of feel-good stuff. And then around probably 4 years ago at this point, right after, it's about a year or so into us developing our relationship with Kay and Danielle and Kofi, we started, when people come into the co-op, to the potlucks, they started talking about how their leases were not being renewed, how their rents were going up dramatically, how their incomes were just not on par with the rise in the cost of increase of living here in Durham. And so we, as a board, the group of us who came together decided that we had to do something about this in terms of having more structure and actually fighting systems. Part of our growing and the early stages, we did a huge amount of leadership development. We decided as a team that what we needed to do was educate ourselves on institutional systemic racism and inequality, and also looking at how systems and power impact communities of color negatively, disproportionately, and how that is highly intentional. And so when we were focusing all those things, we had decided that we probably needed to also have a formal organizational institution. We didn't trust any of the organizations in our community as people who live in the community and directly impacted. And so we created a nonprofit in January. We were approved in January of 2016. And shortly after that began working on issues of housing, food insecurity. Also, within the last year and a half, we've started working on also entrepreneurship. Our board is made up, vast majority of our board, over 80% of our board, not over 90% of our board actually live in the community, and 70% of them are people of color. We have 2 white women. One just joined our board who does not live in the community. The other is actually the mother of Black children, so she is proximate to the impact as well. And so we have been led, and the decisions have been made by people who actually live in the community. Connected to that, we have an advisory board, which is made up of people who you would normally think of as being on a board, who are attorneys, who are nonprofit professionals, who are accountants, who actually help guide the process in terms of giving advice from their perspective and input on how our organization can stay compliant, helping us with fundraising, helping us making sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's, but it's also a capacity building space because there is a transfer of knowledge and how to run and how to organize your own organization. And so the power still rests in the residents' hands, the people who are actually on the board. They're the ones who have the fiduciary and legal power in terms of communities and partnership. But we partner with a group of individuals who have learned the fine art of the system that we live in to make sure that we are actually compliant and building in a way that we are not putting our work at risk. And so right now we have 6 units of multifamily housing because we had people coming to us asking us about housing in the community. We had quite a few board members actually who were multiple times displaced because of gentrification. And so it set us on a trajectory to partner with the largest CDFI in the United States, which is Self-Help Incorporated. And so we were able to purchase 6 units of multi-family housing. We also started a food co-op with the sole purpose of it not being a food pantry, but for it to be a co-op that will be run by people who are actually suffering and having to deal with food insecurity and what we call a food apartheid, because we believe that the system has been intentionally set up to benefit from the labor of Black and brown people, but not to actually benefit to our overall health outcomes and actually giving us access to fresh and local food unless we have the financial means which food is a right. It is not something that should be, fresh and healthy food should be a right. It shouldn't be something predicated on cost or wealth or privilege. And so we set up our own food co-op. The families, we have over 80% of the fresh and local food that is grown by Black farmers in our community and food producers. We have people that have poultry farms. We have people that grow fresh and local produce. We have beekeepers. All of them supply over 80% of our fresh and local food is grown by Black hands. The families that are a part of the co-op, they run the co-op. They volunteer on average 2 to 3 times annually. We also have a leadership team that runs it on an ongoing basis. And they do receive compensation for their work. And each family that signs up for the co-op agrees to volunteer 2 to 3 times annually. They show up, right now we have it every other week, and every other week they're guaranteed anywhere between $500 to $700 worth of fresh and local produce and food staple items to kind of bridge them over. We started with once a year not once a year, I'm sorry, once a month. We had been doing that up until February of this year, just to bridge the gap with food stamps every month. But because we've had COVID hit, so many people have been dramatically hit very hard. And so we had to ramp up that model to having it every other week. We also have a community health organizer initiative that we've created, which is a community health worker certification coupled with our anti-racism organizing and activism. And so we actually have folks that are being trained and actually live in the community, and they're the first line of defense in terms of helping people to connect to systems that actually can be safety nets for their own physical and mental well-being. We also know that the whole health system has been created to study and benefit off of the lack of health in Black and brown communities. And the reason why we state the position as a community health organizer position is when Black people and brown people claim autonomy for our health and moving towards healthy, thriving lifestyles, that's actually a political act. And so we encourage our people in our community in ways that protect and come alongside of their health to take an active role in that. And then the last piece that we have is our Culinary Femme Collective, which is a group of Black and brown and white liberated food business owners and food producers who come together and decided that they want to build their food business in a much more liberatory way. And they all pay higher than a living wage. They all are trying to pull together resources to offer stipends for what we have here, socialized medicine, which is called Obamacare, which is really not socialized medicine, but and to be able to offer stipends also for 5-star childcare for our community, for the people that actually work for them, as well as them sharing employees with different skill sets since they are small businesses. And so they all are networking. Also, they also are part of the whole farming system that we have in terms of our food co-op. They use some of the farmers because what we try to do is create a system that is not predicated upon the further oppression, economic oppression of other people, specifically Black and brown people, but all people, because Black and brown people are much more disproportionately impacted. And so that is the work that we do.
Thank you, Cameron. We'll continue to sprinkle in stories from CIP's experience as we're going through each rung, because it's been a journey, let's say, with local organizations, local government, trying to co-op the work of CIP. The veneer of participatory policy making. And what we are really hoping to get out of this session is to hear stories so we can all be more aware of how the system is seeking to reproduce itself through these very exploitive, in many cases, participatory models. I can start just giving an example of, because this one is one that came very close to the beginning when Kay and I started working with Communities in Partnership. The former mayor in Durham had created the Mayor's Poverty Reduction Initiative. And I placed this one very close to the bottom of participation. One, there was no plan to use the information or to gather information from those who have the local expertise to inform this this larger policy initiative. I met Cameron and other founders of Community and Partnership just after the mayor had pushed back on
morning at 10 a.m.
Pushed back on collecting data about where the community, the baseline data. They had an initiative to increase, reduce poverty, to increase incomes, but weren't going to get a snapshot of what was occurring in the moment before the programs went in place. So Cameron, Ernest, and others pushed back and say, well, what you're going to do is see increases in certain categories without actually improving people's life outcomes. You're just displacing them through gentrification. That was kind of at the foundation of partnering with local, well, not local institutions. We're not partnering with institutions. We end up partnering with individuals who are institutions, but a partnership that would help CIP have control over its own data collection. So I would be interested to hear stories from those participants in the room where they have come across this manipulation of participation. It's not participation in actual agenda setting or policy making. It's there to give a veneer of control, even as the local expertise is not included in the development of new initiatives.
Does anyone have a experience or story they would like to share on manipulation or tokenism on the first rung of the ladder of citizen participation?
Okay, I'll go. Hi, everybody. My name is Tia Coakley. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. Hello to everybody. This is such a pleasure to be in the midst of these type of like-minded people. So I'm gonna say that I'm on a board for a mental health organization here in Louisville, Kentucky. And the community that they serve is definitely the Black and brown and low-income whites. And the board is lily white. The executive leadership is lily white. And when I got asked to be on the board, I was replacing who is now one of our state representatives, and her name's Attica Scott. And for a long time, they would refer to me as a new Attica Scott. And yeah, my role was literally like to be the token Black girl on the organization within the board, and not really much more than that. So I know exactly how that feels.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I'm sorry you had that experience where they stripped you of your name and did not recognize the time and talent that you were giving towards their organization.
Well, you know, things are better now. I became very insistent and made myself heard. And so, you know, it's interestingly enough, with everything going on now, I am who they come to try to figure out what to do next. But I'll be that. But I am, you know, who I am, you know what I mean? So even though you could tell it was just a replacement of that Black seat. And that's what it was, the intention. They just didn't know they was gonna get somebody who was actually gonna have something to say.
So at this point, so part of our work, Tia, what she just said is a huge issue of how the system can maintain itself in terms of the lack of truly having power. So in our organization, what I didn't mention, what I failed to mention, was in all the work that we do, we not only have an anti-racism and an anti-oppression lens, but we also talk about the role of class. So class can play a huge leverage in either upholding or dismantling the system. And oftentimes, organizations or structures of power look for people of color that are actually going to just assimilate or only push the envelope a little bit to give them a little bit of street cred, but not really position or change the scope of power. And so oftentimes, you know, they asked Tia to come on board, which they didn't understand probably that Tia was in her people's community, in our people's community, actually listening and actually going to push the level. And so these are very difficult conversations that we have to have in what I call intra-racial conversations. And I can only speak from it from a Black experience because I'm a descendant of the African diaspora. And so that's my lens that I can speak from it from. And so on this land, how descendants of the African diaspora have been co-opted and how we actually reinvent those same systems and structures and Black embodiment, we have to have conversations and educate ourselves on that as well. That's a part of the whole dismantling and neutralizing and giving access, requiring the powers that be to transfer access and power to us to be able to run our own communities and for us to be able to thrive and not grasping at straws or trying to take one little slice of cheese and cut it all up while they have the whole big rung, you know, that goes on. And so that's part of the conversations that we do have. So next, Danielle, are we going to move on to therapy, or do we want to have, or the passive participation?
Yes, I think we can move on. I do, because where I'd like to spend our time is definitely talking to the group about the upper rungs. Where do we see it being done well? But yes, it's part of the process is getting there. So therapy. Therapy is often where you'll hear things like, if they just knew about our programs, if they just knew and followed through with this particular initiative, things would automatically get better. So I'm sure there's quite a few examples out there. One that we talk about or hear about is we have a local, like the, what is the center where we have some of the meetings? Oh my gosh, it's slipping my mind.
Oh, Re-City.
No, the other, the former school.
Oh, Holton. Holton or
So
Maureen
Holton
Joy.
is,
Are you talking about? Okay.
yeah,
Holton.
Holton is a former school that has been created into a community and career center. They went so far as to make many of their programs free. And they wonder, they have questions like, why aren't people, if they would just come to our programs, we've taken the financial barriers out. If they would just do this, they could have access to all of these resources. What they aren't doing is actually listening to their use of police officers at the entrance, the difficulty of actually scheduling usage of the facility. It often takes 6 to 8 weeks before an event, even to use a small event room.
And you also have to have funds that put down a security deposit. Yeah.
Yes. So it's one of those things where when they talk about it, when Parks and Rec, when the city talks about the institution, they talk about it being underutilized. And if people would just utilize it, people would have more career aspects. People would have better after-school access to after-school programs without actually thinking, listening, or hearing what the barriers are.
So as what Danielle said, the passive participation is community members participate as recipients of information and told what has already been decided. So the decision, there's no decision-making power. And so that's troubling. Does anyone else have an experience on this rung of the ladder in passive participation / therapy in the Arnstein's example? Oh, Ezra, I'm sorry if I'm not saying your, please share.
No, you said it, that was perfect. Thank you so much. It's
okay,
a weird
great.
name.
I just want to honor you with, yes.
Well, I'm Ezra. I work for La Casa. I'm based out of Elkhart, Indiana, USA. I just hit my 90 days, so I say this as a pretty new person in my organization. I was in banking before that, But with everything happening in the United States recently, I brought up a lot of these questions, and essentially the feedback that I'm getting is like the quotes from the ladder on the right side. And so when I brought up, you know, why are we doing financial education and prescribing to people what it is that they need to be learning rather than talking about the roots of it, essentially my boss flat out said, well, you know, we just need to market this better. And then, you know, if they can come to all the classes, then they'll have this information. And so this is like hitting the nail on the head for me. So thank you. Oops.
Does anyone else have an experience?
To Ezra's earlier point, Candace, can you talk a little bit, Cameron, about how CIP has used the REI trainings widely so that people will have an idea and have that understanding of the system so that they can push back when they're hearing things like Ezra's heard?
Yeah, so part of the thing is we refuse to have budgeting classes and financial literacy classes, because what you're doing is you're asking for people who the wealth of this nation is being sustained by, which they're not receiving that wealth. They already know how to budget because they're able to live. They're showing you that they know how to survive in a system that has not allowed them to have the same level of access of resources for their work and their gifts that other people have had. And so we refuse to have conversations in our organizations with our members about their lack of financial literacy, and if they could just, because it would also place a level of denial on the system of inequality. And so unless we're going to have a conversation about economics, we talk a lot about economics and also cooperative movements, and also how much money in terms of our organization or other organizations, like when you're building a small business, how much money is enough? How much do you need? So we'll have conversations like that, because what we don't want to do is recreate the same normatives of capitalism in our Black liberation struggle that we're trying to have as we have, because Durham does have a history of that with Hayti. And so while we have all this brilliant Black excellence in Black Wall Street, Durham is really highly stratified by class. And so you have, the other day I had an interaction with a Black attorney who was suggesting we have a mural project in our community. And he was suggesting that the youth in our community come and volunteer in the age of COVID when their parents are struggling, to come and just volunteer over the course of months to help do this mural. And my whole response was, you're not going to do it using my name and my organization and what we stand for, because our youth deserve to be compensated. You're not taking into, they just think that poor people ought to be grateful for just to sit at the table with no access to a plate, to a fork, to no food, no nothing. And that is a huge issue without having, and it's because power doesn't want to recognize power. That's the whole thing about invisibility. Power maintains itself when we do not talk, when we only talk about who has not benefited. But let's have a conversation about who has. And let's be very clear about that. And that also sets up the conversation for those of us who are a part of our communities, who might be in certain spaces like our board. Not the whole community can't go with me when we're going to this, when we go and talk to the mayor. But because I have that lens, and I have other people on my board sitting with me who have that lens, they're holding also me accountable for not falling into that trap as well. Because it's very easy to do that, but it only exacerbates the negative outcomes. It does nothing to build power for people.
And I do think that volunteerism falls very much within this therapy, passive participation lens, that if you don't come to these programs, no questions about the timing, whether or not there's food, how many times we'll be told that we can't use state funds to buy food, but we know that that's one way that we can bring people together to build relationships, is to use food, but saying that we have these barriers to being able to use funding for food. Or this assumption that everyone should be volunteering, that volunteerism is the pathway forward when there are a lack of funds, not just because the exploitation of time and talent, but seeing it as a stopgap to things that the city taxpayer fund should be paying for. So another example would be how a local park has become a pet project of a very affluent white neighborhood, and they're held up as a standard because they're like, look at all the fundraising they did to really help their park, all the volunteer hours that they're using to help their park, and that understanding that everyone doesn't have that time, those funds to help this public resource, and for that to be the model that is currently being elevated.
I'll just add to that as well. One of the great things about CIP's programs is the amount of attention that's paid to timing of events as well to facilitate participation. And so sometimes when programs are offered, we notice that they're offered during times when most people are working, or in the evenings when people don't have childcare, or they're doing other family oriented things, particularly during the school year. And so always having licensed childcare providers present during meetings and making sure there's appropriate activities for children so that parents can engage, and that the timing of the events, so simple little things about scheduling don't even get paid attention to as well.
Yeah, I think
and we also have that.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we also have that qualifier when people want to come in and share, if they're asking us to participate in an event outside of our scope of what we do as a team. And so, because if they don't have the same rubric for how they hold space for people, it becomes a burden. And we also unabashedly, we view our folks as data for outside organizations coming in. And even with working with Danielle and Kay, even though they're a part of our team, they still make sure that there's some level of, some sort of reimbursement for people. So we have stipends and things of that nature, because people's data, institutions and organizations have made millions off the data of poor people. And so let's be real and honest about that that's a part of their experiences and need to be validated and not just used and co-opted. And that's another form of what we view as white supremacy, institutional oppression. And so we require, like when Duke wants to come over, Duke is a major health driver, especially in the Southeast, but it has a national recognition, I would say global recognition. But when we do work with Duke, we're like, you have to give some stipends. If it's a program, you have to make sure we have top-notch childcare for our folks. There has to be programming attached to that childcare, and there also has to be food. And so those are the types of things that we require.
We have a question in the chat that I thought we could take a moment to just speak on. This is from Harriet Johnson. I work for a community foundation in the UK, and I'm really interested to hear if people supported by their foundations, and do they work in an ABCD way? Where do they fit on this ladder? Do you want to start, Cameron?
I would be interested to see if anyone else, first off, I want to give someone else a chance to respond to this as well, and then I'll respond. How are people's experiences with philanthropy, foundations, in terms of doing asset-based community development? And I can speak at it from, because when we were trained as asset-based community development facilitators and coaches, I was a part of an organization where John McKnight actually was on the board, and I remember sitting next to him, and I asked him about the role of racism. And we do it from a very clear lens of having a racial analysis. And his response was, we didn't think about that. We barely have been able to think about that until recently. And so that was like 5 to 6 years ago. And so we operationalize asset-based community development from a racial equity lens. And so are there others that may have a more homogeneous, landscape that they might, or that hasn't been an issue for them, would like to share?
The Denver Foundation, Leanna?
Yeah, the Denver Foundation, yeah. Linnea, yes.
Yeah, this is Linnea, and I work with Maker Housing Partners, which is actually the housing authority for Adams County here in Colorado. And I've actually worked with the Denver Foundation and multiple different organizations, and they're actually really spearheading a lot of the ABCD work in Colorado. And I mean, this is what they're encouraging all of their grantees to focus on. They just hosted a meeting this week, for instance, with a group of us that participated in their program called The Shift. And The Shift is all about how do organizations or institutions make decisions to become more member-centered or participant-centered, or essentially that we're coming from that that top tier of self-mobilization. And so they took time to gather us all together after a bit of, kind of overcoming this initial stage of the crisis to start asking those questions again. Like, okay, we kind of had to take the reins for a little bit and get stuff under control, but where have we lost our focus on making sure that our community members are the ones that are driving this thing and are making the decisions about how we move forward, making sure we haven't lost sight of, an institution or an organization thinking that we have the right answer and making the decision for our community. So the Denver Foundation is amazing. Mike Green is highly involved with them and wrote a really great book on asset-based community development. That's kind of my Bible. So.
Thank you for sharing. I think it's wonderful that they are really checking, and because foundations have flexibility that governmental funds do not often have, foundation funding will allow for some of that innovation that is slow to be adopted by local governmental funding structures. One thing that we've had to do some pushback around corporate and foundational funding is timelines and the demand for progress on larger systemic issues on a very rapid timeline. For communities that have been historically experienced divestment, marginalization, they'll give a 2-year grant and say, like, we expect to see huge percentage changes that aren't necessarily in line with the amount of funding they're providing, in line with the amount of support. So one thing that has been critical is taking an asset approach and providing both the time and the resources to do the work. Because we can undercut community-led organizations when we expect things of them, when we aren't actually providing the support, expecting them to turn the tide back on affordable housing for $50,000 over a 24-month period.
Cameron and Danielle, I want to call your attention to a question about what is racial analysis and who would do such an analysis?
Yeah, that's what I was going to and so so basically in terms of, and what I can do is, like I said, I can speak from a US perspective, even though I've lived overseas. I've lived in Eastern Europe for a period of time. And so in so many ways, race or the racial identity or the racial designation of people groups, overall, in terms of, if you look at social determinants of health, in terms of the categories of their quality of life indicators, race is the largest factor that impacts your ability of how well you actually do on those scales, in terms of your lifespan, your health outcomes, your mental health outcomes, your housing, your transportation, your work, your overall ability to gain or to not gain wealth. All of those in most Western societies I'll say that. And the only reason why is because I just don't want to speak so, you know, blank with a blanket. I can only speak from the experiences that I've had and from the knowledge that I have, is that the biggest indicator of that is your race, is what you have become to be known as in terms of your racial identity. And from a US perspective, in terms of quality of life or health outcomes and your overall ability to build and gain wealth, the strata usually goes somewhere like between First Nations people or Native Americans are somewhere on par with African Americans, and we do this back and forth in different areas of quality of health outcomes. Then the second group of people are Latinx populations, but some Latinx populations are also considered First Nation peoples. Then the next group generally is Asian or Pacific Island people that are in the US, and then the top of the rung is white. And so in terms of health outcomes and your outcomes of impacting in systems, that's generally the hierarchy. And so having a racial analysis is taking those facts and that hierarchy into play in terms of how you look at your work and how you look at systems and how you make decisions on how you govern your organization, how you make decisions on how you interact with power, and how you try to gain power and access for the betterment or the benefit of the people group that you're trying to impact. And so in just an example, we have a faculty member at one of our historically Black colleges and universities who actually has done a lot of studying over the past, I think Danielle Henry's been doing that work for like at least 4 to 5 years at this point, correct? On basic entrepreneurship and also the level of overall cumulative wealth in the Black, Latinx, and white communities. And this is in terms of, he's done it across the nation in key cities, but he's done it, the part that I focus on in Durham that's because that's my place. And so in Durham, and if anybody is familiar with American history, during Jim Crow era was the era where we had high segregation. There were a lot of laws that restricted access, that made it illegal for Black people to enter into spaces that were inhabited by white people. And so the first level of data he came out with probably 3 to 4 years ago had the overall cumulative wealth. Now, mind you, we're not in Jim Crow now, supposedly, which I would argue in some areas we are, but the overall wealth of African Americans, and Durham has one of the highest rates of PhDs and highly educated Black people in the Southeast United States. We are a very educated community in terms of our Black professionals, that we were at the same overall level of wealth that our people were at Jim Crow. That was 3 to 4 years ago. Henry re-upped the data recently last fall. Now the regression has dramatically increased. We are at the overall wealth last fall as our people were when we were emancipated from slavery. I can guarantee you when he looks at the data, he said we were on a trajectory of zero wealth in about 15, 20 years. That was pre-COVID. Now that we have COVID, I can guarantee you that is going to speed that train up very quickly. And so from a perspective of our people, as African American people, specifically because we have been able to benefit from some level, especially Black middle class people, we don't realize how we are situated in terms of our overall wealth. We are dramatically losing steam because we don't own anything. Because you don't gain wealth by working for Glaxo or for Duke University per se, for most of us. You earn wealth, especially cumulative wealth, as a racial group. You earn that by owning. You earn that by owning businesses, by owning land, by owning property. And a lot of times, there was also a couple of iterations over the past 10, 15 years, we had a huge amount of housing loss in Black and brown communities because of predatory lending, housing lending. And they intentionally went into Black and brown communities and gave them terms that actually ended up causing them to lose their houses. Because if you did that in a white community, it would have been a total upend. The system, there was no way you could have gotten away with that, like these financial institutions were able to in the Black and brown communities. And so Part of that racial analysis helps us look at the history and the lens, and actually what we need to build and gain and maintain power in our own communities from a Black perspective. And I know First Nation peoples that do the same thing that we work alongside of, as well as Latinx community members as well.
From an academic standpoint, it's putting that racial ethnic lens front and center. I got really frustrated that we were always controlling for race rather than seeing it as the explanatory factor. And if it is, because it is an explanatory factor, thinking through how the current systems will exacerbate that historic situation to make it even worse. We see that when we did a race-based study of trees within Old East Durham, historically Black neighbors versus historically white neighborhoods. Not only do you see a differential in urban tree canopy, which has impacts on energy, on health, in addition to their location near high traffic areas, so you don't have the filtering from the trees. And then the policies that are in place around urban tree canopy, what allows them to put fewer trees back, or the fact that there's industrial land uses that don't have the same requirements, guarantee that this community will have fewer trees, even as they say we're in we're no longer working under the same Jim Crow separate and unequal situations, when our push to treat neighborhoods equally now will still exacerbate that historic inequity.
Okay, can we get to the areas of tokenism, Danielle, on the rung?
I guess we could go up a bit. We could go up to the placation, because I do want you to talk a bit about participatory budgeting in Durham.
Yes, so part of the participation by consultation incentive, or informing and consultation, or mandated participation, I think it could cover both of those rungs, correct, Danielle? It could fit under both of those. So we have Durham is probably one of the, if not the most liberal and progressive city in the South. And so in terms of how we think about ourselves, not how we operationalize things necessarily, but we have that reputation for being a very progressive city. And so part of the thing is we have one of our city council members who actually traveled, I think, over the nation and maybe outside of the United States to look at different models of participatory budgeting, which is a way that government can actually take a percentage of the funds that they have available, that they actually designate for different infrastructure projects or whatever, that they can actually involve the citizenry in actually deciding where those funds actually go. And the premise behind that is supposed to be to listen directly from communities, especially those using a racial equity analysis and seeing where the divestment has historically taken place, and actually giving those communities a seat at the table more substantively to help some of that funding actually correct and fill in the gaps of where the intentional divestment has been going on in our communities. And so, and it's not supposed to be for the reallocation of funds for projects that the city already has on its books, that it has on its regular maintenance or anything that they were planning in their capital improvement project. It should be things that specifically communities of color first, and then white communities can actually use to use an asset-based ideology of them going to their neighbors in their community, coming up with a consensus for ideas, and actually sharing that in a moderated space. And so what our city council person did, they actually called us up, specifically targeted us and asked us to submit a proposal that was connected to our food co-op. And so we did. At their behesting, and went through the whole process. The commission that was actually elected to actually look and decide on all the projects was citizen-led, all citizens, and even the vetting, the executive team was citizen-led to kind of narrow down the scope of how many projects would be chosen. And so after we went through the whole process where we presented we showed up at all the meetings, we presented our plans and answered all the questions. Got the go-ahead saying that we're being pushed to the final vote, that we got one of the highest scores on their rubric, on their grading system. And then when it came time for everything to come through, we had to meet with the city attorney, because my husband's a civil rights attorney, wanted to meet with us because she felt like she needed to give us a little bit more background than she gave to other people, because we know how to organize. I think she was thinking she wanted to mitigate the blowback. And so basically, telling us that they really didn't think this through very well, and that they could not fund the co-op, even though we were chosen. And so going back 3 to 4 months before, this city council person came to our community group, not Communities in Partnership, but we have different community groups that we're all a part of. And it came to one of our groups that actually is led by our elders in the community, and they asked for public support. This is a community group that's directly connected to the city, and they wanted a letter stating that they would support the participatory budgeting. And the elders in the room, those of us that are in the middle age on down, we were sitting behind our elders, and they were like, we're not going to support you because we know the history of what you're trying to get us to do is you're trying to get us to approve $2.5 million that you can reallocate the way that you want to, because at the end of the day, you're not ever going to approve funding projects that we think we need for our community and for ourselves. So even though we went along with that process, I had to bring that up again. And then shortly after that, we heard from multiple other community groups, because there were other neighborhoods that were either outer ring neighborhoods or slightly above the outer ring, who had applied as well, who were Black and brown led, and who eventually were told the same thing. And so at the end of the day, what they ended up funding was they funded the only community-rooted organization community organization that they funded was the LGBTQ Youth Center. Everything else was not funded, just about, except in terms of infrastructure that they had already planned to do in those communities that lined up with what the city already had in their scope and their plan. And so they were using this as a tool to tout. There was like articles talking about how wonderful the process was. I mean, it was a farce. And there's even faculty members at Duke who've written white papers on how it was anything but equitable, and how it was just a ruse to get, yet again, the veneer of Durham being very progressive and very forward thinking, but they're keeping the same old in place. And so that was our experience with that participatory budgeting process with our city. And the reason why they said they couldn't fund the food co-op was because there had not been any precedent for them to fund a food program in the city, because we have both a city and a county. They could not fund it in the city perspective because there wasn't any precedent for them to fund anything outside of senior food systems funding. And so we have not only seniors, we have across the board. We have seniors, families, youth across the board. And so they could not fund that, but recently they found a way to fund another organization, $90,000, that doesn't even have food systems and food access as a part of the work that they actually have a track record in doing. And it's not led specifically by directly impacted people. So does anyone else have an example that they would like to share of the participation by consultation or incentive or mandated participation, or the tokenism area over here to the left?
And I think these are particularly important areas to have examples in, because I think this is where you're starting to see the glimmer of participation, but it still can be very insidious in that its execution can further undercut our push towards a more just society.
I see that Sadie has mentioned that tokenism is rife in government consultation and it's not inclusive. Does anyone have an instance they'd like to share on an experience that they've had?
Is that Sarah Fox? Did you have
oh, I can't see.
Hi, I'm working for a mental health charity in the UK, and I mean, the organisation I work for is funded by the National Health Service, so it's very governmental. I work for a charity that's a partner that delivers the service. And this is just on like a very small scale, but my role has been brought in to kind of coordinate co-production, people with lived experience of mental health issues, thinking in particular about, like you've already mentioned, all of the social determinants of people who are more likely to suffer mental health problems. And the board of senior decision makers for the service, when I first arrived in my post, said, oh, well, can you get us a service user and then they can sit on the board and then we will have done co-production? Yeah. Yeah. So it's only a small, like, example, but I think it's very like symbolic of the type of tokenism that happens. And this is a service that thinks that it's doing user involvement. Well, it thinks it's doing co-production. It's not obviously, it's not even doing user involvement, but they really thought that taking somebody who is likely to have a history of like anxiety anyway, pulling them out of the community and sitting them in a context that they've probably like not experienced and don't feel like, I don't feel comfortable in those meetings, and I've been to however many of them now, that those people would just be sort of magically prepared to be able to play an equal role in that environment. And yeah, I see that happen a lot in the NHS and in local government in the UK anyway.
Thank you for sharing, Sarah. I see we do have a question. How has the effectiveness of your work influenced other communities or being replicated in other communities? Our struggle is, essay, I'm assuming South Africa, is that poor people have been conditioned to be grateful for what they get. Oh, okay. So part of that racial equity analysis that we actually do is decolonizing constructs of how whiteness has dictated the value and the competency and the value of Black and Brown autonomy. And that goes into our talking about anti-Blackness and internalized oppression. And so we've done a lot of training, and it's been very tough. It's not been easy. That's a lot of inward work that you have to do in looking at how, and I'm speaking from a Black or an African-American perspective, looking at how I have been taught to dehumanize myself and devalue my Blackness, and to be grateful and to not acknowledge the history of colonization. That actually, you know, there's t-shirts now that we have that a lot of our youth wear, that we built this joint. And so there's a book that came out recently. We all know about the history of those of us in the US, The Half That Has Never Been Told, but it's a very good book that talks about how the wealth in this nation would have never risen to the level that it did without stolen labor, stolen land, stolen labor, and stolen people. And so part of that education is what we have really focused in on for our people in our community. And so making sure that they're very clear that who they are, who built this nation, and even right now, it has been racism, institutional systemic racism, those systems just adapt with every iteration of us responding. There's always an adaptation to basically keep power and control. And so we've had to do a whole lot of work, and we have to continuously do a whole lot of work about challenging ourselves and our communities. I'm sorry, my doggy is hearing something. About how grateful is basically another form of a colonized mentality in the way that you're talking about on here. There's gratitude, definitively. We all need to be grateful and understand the blessings in the area in which we're situated. But also at the same time, when power, which built the wealth, not of its own hands, but off the free labor and oppression of other people, that's a very different conversation. And part of the conversation that we're beginning to have nationally was starting to come up with community leaders, specifically from Black and Brown, and even in some institutions. The guy at the Ford Foundation Darren Walker stated this at Duke quite a few months ago, that we need to have a power analysis to look at where philanthropy has come from, how philanthropy has actually gotten the money that it's gotten, and how it actually is predicated on the nonprofit industrial complex, and how that only exacerbates inequality. And so those are conversations that we're having. I think part of it is just because people are tired. You know, the whole thing with George Floyd, that's been going on for decades. You know, our communities being over-policed and oftentimes also under-policed, anti-Black and the dehumanization of our people, anti-Blackness and the dehumanization of our people. And people are just getting really tired of it, especially in light of the narrative that most of America wants to believe about itself, that we're everything but that we're the best of the best. And that is actually, we're awfully good at co-opting and building wealth off the backs of not only the poor people in this nation, but poor nations across the world. We have started more stuff and more hot ass messes and created a whole lot of pain and suffering for other nations. And so we just now are getting to the area where we have trained and educated academics like Kay and like Danielle and like Henry McCoy. Dr. Sandy Darity's been at this for a long time at Duke, you know, but they've been, now he's being joined with a number of other professionals that can actually speak with some credibility, because they look at credentials, which is another tool white supremacy uses, but they know, like Danielle knows who she's accountable to. Danielle knows she's our people. So when Danielle, even though all that is Stanford, Ivy League trained and everything, when Danielle comes into this community, Miss Midori and them around the corner, who barely got a pot to pee and to throw the window out of, they love Danielle. And I'll go even further, they love Kay too. They know who they are. And so it's because in those spaces, over the period of time, they have proven time and time again that they will stand up to the best of their ability, because we need them to keep their jobs too. We don't need folks getting fired. But at the same time, being very clear and very firm in who they're accountable to. And so that's been part of our struggle and our trajectory also as a team, that how we do even do self-care along those lines, because it's hard being in that space. It's not easy. Always, you feel like you're always in a battle all the time. But that's part of the work that we're called to do if we're ever going to change the system. And then the other question is about our work being replicated in other communities. We have sister communities, like there's a community in West Southern Pines that Kay has started interacting with briefly, getting to know, of a historically Black township down there, which Southern Pines is where the PGA, it's the golf capital of the South. It is a very, very wealthy community. But there was a Black community that was incorporated and back during the early 1900s. It was late 1800s and the early 1900s, correct, Kay? Is that correct? That they were incorporated, and in most situations were redlining, where they pushed us to the outer rims because white communities didn't want to live on the riverbanks. They pushed the Black community next to where the river was. Well, in about was it like the 40s or 50s, Kay, or the 30s? I can't remember.
1931.
1931, white folks started having an issue with their water supply. So guess what they decided to do? They decided to reincorporate the Black township into the white township and take over the water supply for from the Black community. So this is how white supremacy works. And so we have basically partnered with them, and they're still, right now, they're trying to keep their housing, because a lot of baby boomers are moving down from the north because of the housing here. Even though the housing prices are going up across the United States, compared to the north, our housing prices are really sweet. And so a lot of them are moving down into historically Black communities all over the South, and specifically areas like Southern Pines, that now once communities that were blighted or thought of as only areas for Blacks, there were Black coastal communities. We had coastal communities up and down the coastline of North, because nobody wanted to live over there because of the hurricanes, the flooding, all of that. But within the last 40, 50 years, there's been a reversal of that. And so these are the communities that we kind of connect with on a scale. And I have some connections out in Oakland. We're just now getting to talk to other folks, because it's kind of our model is a little different, because we view ourselves as reverse gatekeeping. And so the type of gritty kind of grimy, you know, startup organizations that are led by directly impacted communities on a scale, of course. Those are the types of organizations that we kind of partner with and get involved with. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so Sadie was saying curriculum development and training is largely based on Western knowledge and experience, which undermines our African context, traditional local knowledge and culture. How has that changed in your situation? How successful have you been in decolonizing development programs, research, et cetera? So Danielle, do you and Kay want to talk about how, in terms of our research, how we've, and our community-based participatory research?
Yes, which has its own set of challenges that we won't go into too much now. But
no, but just a little bit. Yeah, just a little bit. I know we want to get to the other. Yeah.
And also responding to Ron Dwyer Voss's question about community surveys, I feel the same way. How often we see surveys that will then be inputs into local policy, and they call it a community survey, but it's something that they mailed out. That's something that they had a set of questions, whether or not they were the right questions. So one of the ways that we are pushing against that is to decide how can we do this differently. So it is, one, building capacity within the community, that the community is the owner of the data, and that it still will be able to push back against the larger system. One thing we saw early on was this decision by, who knows, powers that be in some analyses that were occurring that Old East Durham wasn't gentrifying, despite what everyone was seeing on the streets, despite community members would say, all you have to do is count the portable toilets, and I can tell you that gentrification is coming because they are gutting homes. I know people have been displaced, and yet analyses from the city was saying that no, it's not actually occurring. So we wanted to make sure, one, that we don't use a quantitative analysis that drowns out those voices, that local knowledge is data, but how do we amplify it? So we used a technique called community mapping, coupled with some statistical analysis. So we looked at places where community members are saying these areas are gentrified. And then we looked at the housing sales around those points. And we're able to show, if you're not looking at whole census tract, if you get to the nitty gritty of what community members are seeing on a day-to-day basis, they were more than correct, as it's now clearly shown by the housing prices, but they were able to forecast that if local officials have been willing to listen, there might have been some earlier interventions. So what we're seeing is not, we're not sidelining research, we're not sidelining community voice, we're talking about how do they work together to amplify each other. So with our community surveys, community residents are the ones who are helping us develop the questions that they want to ask themselves and each other. They are those who are doing the surveys. They're there usually with support, meaning there might be a student or one of us that are there to do, record the answers, or maybe they're recording the answers more or less as a pair, but it is the community members who are asking the questions of their neighbors. They're the ones who own the data. So when, we have, local government agencies saying, oh, that's what we thought was happening with transportation, can we have this data? I'm not the gatekeeper to that data. It is those community members deciding, do we want to release this data, and are we having those hard conversations that data is not neutral? In that same data in someone else's hands will shift policy away from community concerns because of how they're interpreting it outside of context. So yes, I agree that the way community surveys are done perpetuates power structures, perpetuates our ideas about data. At the same time, I would say to people who are in academic positions, in research positions, to look for the ways that they can provide that technical support and expertise, because you don't, in other words, keeping people outside of the system still lets the system perpetuate itself.
Yeah, and so part of it, oh, Kay, were you gonna say something? Sorry, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that some of the other ways that that we work to give the community ownership over data is to flip the model. So Danielle will create these maps that are based on data that come from the county and city, based on their GIS services, developing data layers to show where different uses are. And she uses an approach of having the community verify that, like printing that out and saying, we can't necessarily trust that the government data is accurate. Let's go through the process of having the community verify this and correct anything that's there. And so community members will come through and say, hey, no, that's not where the old dry cleaner or whatever business was. It's actually over here. And hey, here's some sites that another approach is a walk shop, where again, you flip the model. Instead of having some sort of outside researcher or expert coming in to educate the community, the researchers the community members identify places in their community that they want to go and share stories about. And then they take us on a walk around the community on this walk shop, and we record their stories about what's going on in the different locations. And you know, it's been a really rich experience to have community members walk you to, hey, this is the first house that flipped in our neighborhood. We consider this the ground zero of gentrification starting. And, you know, one community member sharing at the time that it was a job he got to help with those renovations. And had he known what was going to happen, he wouldn't have participated. So flipping that model of the researchers are really the community members, and we are helping to, as scribes in many ways, has been another way of sort of decolonizing the research.
And we also, so what Kay and Daniel are alluding to, so also all the things that they're talking about, we take time. And so we let folks know really quickly that we come from an African culture, and in terms of our identity and who we are as a people, and the same really rapid level of acceleration and lack of giving people time to build relationships will not fly over here. It won't fly with our organization. So we're very clear about that. And so we have voices for our elders coming to the table where they're often dismissed, which from our cultural context is highly offensive. And so we allow that space for our elders to tell the stories of our communities and of our people, and to share so we can understand where we came from. And so that will hopefully will not be lost. We would love to have more opportunities for that. And that's something that we're looking forward to trying to do even more so. We also, this whole nonprofit industrial thing where they focus on children only, which actually is anti-Blackness and white supremacy. Basically teaching Black children and brown children that for them to succeed, they have to leave their community and basically separate themselves from their people. And we head on, I mean, and there's Black-led organizations that actually do this. And we are very vocal and very outspoken how we do not separate our children from our elders. We do not separate them from their community and from their people, because the data is showing, because again, we have researchers who've come out of this type of ideology and who it has harmed, that you can look at the data on Black professionals as they climb up the ladder and how their mental health is totally at risk oftentimes, and how they feel lonely and how they feel objectified. And in terms of their overall, was it really worth them to sacrifice who they were to make it to the American dream, which is rooted in white supremacy? And so these are the types of ways we flip the script, is allowing organizations of powers that be understand that when they're interacting with us in our community and in spaces that we've been allowed to come in, we bring this up, that you cannot have that context, because our children and our elders, all of them, we all need each other. We need to be together, and we need to maintain the levels of interaction and relationship that are a norm and are a part of our culture. and spending time listening to, honoring the voices of our elders, making sure that we are breaking bread, being highly relational, and having storytelling as a part of our process of actually developing our narrative, having door-to-door appreciative inquiry, quote unquote. We've been doing, in my opinion, Black folks have been doing asset-based community. It is so intrinsically a part of who we were that it was an ideology that someone studied Black and brown people operationalizing. They said, okay, let's make this a form of organizing and activism and a way of community engagement. But our people have been doing this for a long time. First Nations people have been doing this for a long time. Indigenous people around the world have been doing this for a long time. And I would dare say even white folks before a huge amount of the power, and especially poor white folks, were doing this for a long time. So I think having these conversations and letting folks, and someone said it's called Ubuntu in South, it is. And so going back to making sure of remembering who we are and having spaces for us to just be. Vivette Jeffries Logan, who is a First Nation sister of mine, who is anti-racism organizer and activist and trainer, she says it's who we be. Who we be, all in terms of our whole world perspective, who we be and who we claim and who claims us and how we interact with the world around us, including even our physical environment, nature, how we treat each other, and how we treat even the society outside of the walls and the construct of who we quote unquote belong to. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I don't want to type it in the chat. Is it okay if I ask over a video?
Of course, Hannah, yes.
I'm just wondering, when you're saying this, I'm thinking sort of the pressure from funders and institutions to do things at a certain pace and in a certain way. How do you maintain, and I've done some thinking around ABCD and maintaining legitimacy in sort of, is that using specific language? Like, how do you maintain legitimacy in the processes that are happening in communities while doing it at a pace and doing it in a way that works to the funders who have a prescribed narrative and structure on how they want it to work?
So our organization is not for every funder, and I'm very clear about that. I have pissed off funders. It's just the reality of it, because I refuse to set what we have as goals and what we need to heal ourselves and our community and build our capacity based upon people who built their wealth off the backs of Black and brown communities. I'm not going to base what we do on that, because at the end of the day, that's what's gotten us into this mess in the first place. And so we are very specific about the types of funders. It's kind of like this relationship. We have funders. So we have trust fund babies. I'm going to be honest with you. White men who come from a high amount of wealth, and they're over there at the co-op every other week and delivering meals to senior citizens on Friday morning and writing six-figure checks. Now, I'm just going to be honest. That's the type of person. So that means he can call me up anytime we talk about stuff in his family. It's a reciprocal relationship. It's reciprocal. So it's not only that they have something to give, but it's also we have things to give as well. And also acknowledging the history of why we sit where we sit and being okay with that, and that we're on a journey and we're learning from each other. And so there's some funders who don't want to hear anything about that. They don't want to come and visit, except for, they want to come and visit the office. They don't want to come. And we don't believe in poverty pimping and poverty porn either. We don't want folks coming just taking pictures of our people either. Now that doesn't. We want people that want to engage and truly learn about who and what we are and how we can collectively basically reorient or tear down this system so it can benefit everybody. That's the type of funders that we want to work with. And because we are in the Durham community so much, I mean, and it's so progressive, we have slowly been able, because it was hard at the beginning, wasn't it, Kay and Danielle, because we didn't have a pot to pee in or when to throw it out of. Everything for the first, up until probably 2017, when we got our first grant, everything before that, from 2012 to 2017, everything was funded by people on the board. Everything. The potlucks, the neighborhood clean, unless the city partnered with us with trash bags or something like that, we came out of our pockets all the time. And that's what we did. And we knew we could do it because we could take care of ourselves. But it was when we started entering into these massive system issues that we knew that we couldn't sustain, because we didn't come from inherited wealth, as one of our board members who has been displaced like 5 or 6 times in the last 7 years. We don't come from inherited wealth. We have to figure out another way. How can we use the wealth that's been created off our backs for us to work towards a system that isn't, we're not always depending on charity, because even like the food co-op, you know, that even is a more liberative, because now we've been doing this, it's been highly funded by charity at this point. But now we have a young man from the community who has grown up, and now he's a chef and a farmer, and he is actually flipping the script on that, and he's building basically a store. And so that's what he's doing, because it has to be sustainable. And so unless organizations and funders understand that we are not in the charity business long term. We do what we have to do to take care of our people now, because people are hungry, they need housing, they need medical care, they need health care. We understand that. We take care of the immediate now. We know how to do that. But what we cannot rely on is the continuation of charity-based models. It will not work. It always leaves us at whatever whim the powers that be, which in the American context, what white America feels like giving. And that's not, you can't thrive off of that. You can, and nowadays you can't even survive. And so we have to build systems. So the philanthropy that we work with is okay with that. Not only are some of them okay with that, they would prefer that. Because we have philanthropic partners who say they're tired of the soup kitchens, the food pantries. They're tired of, you know, always having to do charity. Let's build a system where people who have been intentionally divested from and have their wealth and their labor has been stolen, let's build something so that they can have their own. And that's what the both and, that's what we're about. I would like to know what kind of books you would recommend. Thank you so much. I think what I can do is I can forward a book list. Danielle and Kay, we can get a book list to Hannah. Hannah, do you all have access to the people's email that are on this, that are attending? And so there's a lot of books that from across, I mean, the one that we've been reading most recently is Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva, who's a First Nations brother who worked in philanthropy, and basically talking about decolonizing the system of how we see money and philanthropy from a First Nations perspective in a more collective identity, which most Black and Brown people come from, in terms of we have a responsibility not only to supply for our immediate households, which oftentimes are intergenerational, but we also have a responsibility of helping our neighbors across the street and our brothers and sisters, whether they're here or overseas or wherever, that we are a collective and we belong to each other and we're responsible for each other. And so that's one of the books that we have found very useful in helping us engage with philanthropy, because it was written to basically help set the record straight on that and actually give legitimacy to the work and the way that we're doing it. Oh, Ms. Sadie said, it's important to promote restoration of African philanthropy as a way to leverage local resources to liberate communities and build resilience. Yes, it is. It is so important, because oftentimes we discount the resources that we have amongst ourselves in our own communities. And that was something that we did lean on heavily at the very beginning. We lean on it now in terms of resources and gifts and capacity building. Not so much in COVID, because I'm really reticent to ask too much from our community right now, because people are scrambling, and I just gotten word today that they're going to lift the moratorium on evictions. So I'm very fearful of the level of evictions that are going to come out over this next month or two. But see, this is a system. This whole, and a lot of folks were looking at COVID as a way to actually maybe be a wake-up call for people to realize that this system of vulture capitalism is not working for anyone except for a very, very small percentage of people. It's not even working for the overall white community. It really isn't, because there's a lot of white people that are suffering. And so having these conversations, but we really do, because as my elders say, we make a way out of no way, because that's what how we've had to live. And our people have, and some of our elders said, we've been going through COVID the whole time, nobody else was. And so that's part of looking at those, looking and valuing our own abilities to provide for ourselves. There's a lot of ways, and that's another way also to decolonize the myth of anti-Blackness as well. So we want to get to the last, because I know we only have, we have 19 minutes. So I think we want to get to the degrees of citizen power. Mm-hmm. Danielle, do we want to?
Yes, this would be a great time to talk about, you know, we've talked a lot about how the system will exploit time, talent, will marginalize voice, but there's also ways that organizations are pushing towards the upper rungs, where they're getting to self-mobilization, where they're doing interactive participation. So please take this time to share some of those stories.
Did you want me to go first? Or do you want someone to give an example first?
Let's see if we can get some examples and then, you know.
Yeah, that's what I was, yeah.
And remember, it's experiences that you've had. A lot of the, when we did the pre-questions, a lot of the approaches that came up were in this partnership rung. So really just your everyday experiences. They don't have to be wildly, you know, the first time it's ever been done in the world. It's more just sharing your experiences.
I can share an experience. I worked in Tanzania for a few years, and I was working with a group of older folks trying to increase access, create a system to increase access to chronic disease care. And we were working under a grant that was sort of untethered money, so it provided a lot of freedom and the process and the approach that ABCD is based in. And the funder and I kind of went in with, we're going to do X, Y, and Z to provide access and increase access to healthcare. And then after participation and consultation and implementing some mapping and different interactive approaches, the older folks said, no, we don't need that. We would like to create a co-op and provide a more sustainable means of economic support to ourselves to then have the freedom to choose what we do with that money. So it totally changed the pathway of the work that we were doing. And I think it was the approach, and then also the fact that the money was from one of those individual persons who didn't have an institution that had a specific way of doing something. So it provided freedom in what we could do with it. But it was very much directed by the older folks themselves.
Could you talk a bit about some of how you navigate? Because a lot of times when we propose something new, there's a lot of pushback, bureaucracy. Could you talk about some of the pitfalls or challenges, or did the system itself allow and really hear the willingness to shift more to what the older folks were pushing towards?
Well, I think a lot of the challenges came in my positionality coming into the space. So it took a long time to build relationships based on trust and mutual respect, because there was a lot of power dynamics that were based in colonial norms, where I had all the answers, even though I had 75 years less experience and no connection and experience in the community itself. So I was a complete outsider. So that was a big challenge in trying to create a conversation that wasn't based on expectation, and we should be grateful for anything that the funder comes in. So it took about 8 months to have a conversation that I would say was based in truth and not based in expectation and power. And even then it was so small, but it was really appreciative inquiry and taking the time to build relationships. And yeah, we did asset mapping and community mapping, but even sort of the process of mapping was unfamiliar. So how to address those processes. So then it was more of a conversation rather than let's bring out a piece of flip chart paper and draw a map together. So it was a lot of adjustment in how we talked about things and how to deconstruct or detach from the academic nature of where I was coming from. And then also me acknowledging that I couldn't separate myself from my positionality.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that positionality and really doing the self-reflection is what I think is most important for me to stay, not to be overtaken by the academic system that I'm a part of, but also for that ongoing work that I have to encourage students, to people doing the work, that one training doesn't mean you've arrived. And I think we see that a lot in Durham, particularly in the government that has supported a lot of government employees to do racial equity training, but they see it as a checkbox versus the ongoing checking of privilege, of, what does it mean to give up power and have power with someone rather than over. And that power that doesn't have to be, I'm making you do something you otherwise wouldn't do, but the power of manipulating expertise or data or access. And those are hard questions and difficulty for people to wrestle with, and to realize that the work is on ongoing daily basis to make sure that you are pushing yourself to be, to live into those ideals. I see where someone mentioned in the chat where Sadie, I believe, my apologies for pronunciation if I've gotten it wrong. We have good policies that promote public participation, but it's good on paper, and we don't really get into that full implementation. And I think that's something that we, as a group, couldn't have a conversation about, like, how do we push the implementation, because it is like constant vigilance.
Any others want to share? Okay, two participants raised their hands. Sadie has raised her hand. Go right ahead.
Okay, can I come in?
Yes, please do, please do.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for the thought-provoking engagements. I think, much as we have a challenge with public participation, I think one way that I think and which we are actually engaging in now is to mainstream ABCD in local government. Because that's where actually action is taking place. And we've got, for example, integrated development planning processes, but in most instances, communities are not participating in the processes, because of the challenges of, politicizing development, or, and that in itself, it's one of the barriers for participation. So, and once, as we engage with, your councillors, the mayors, the speakers, and begin to, workshop with them on asset-based development, for them to understand the benefit of asset-based development and how it can benefit them, even as a local leadership, then that in itself assists us in terms of ensuring that, planning is not only target driven, because in most instances, develop, when you engage in processes of development, it seems to be delaying, it seems to be time consuming, and people want to see quick results. And as a matter of fact, then that in itself, it really derails the whole, development process, and you don't achieve anything. So in order to move the thinking from this target-oriented planning and taking shortcuts in development, there is a need to also ensure that the mindset is changed from the top, because you can work with communities and they can begin to see the benefit of, participation and etc. But if the leadership itself is still not really appreciating the importance of participation, then we are not really going to achieve anything.
Thank you. I think Ezra had his hand raised.
I think that was from earlier. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay.
To Sadie's point, I do think that that really is in line with one thing that really resonates with me, is that your liberation and my liberation are caught up together. Like, it's not, you are also, because Black and brown people are oppressed or marginalized in the US, it is also detrimental to those who are in power, to your well-being, to your mental health, to you being a full, whole, realized individual. Without that, knowing that me doing better means you will also do better, because I think that the dynamic setup is, if you're doing better, that automatically takes something away from me. So I'm going to fight tooth and nail for you to not to get that something more than scraps coming off the table. Where if we can change that mindset that this is going to help you make better policy, this is going to help you make better plans, this is going to help you be a happier, healthier individual, then we can break down some of those barriers to getting to these upper rungs. So does anyone have examples where they've been able to mainstream at least some of what asset-based community development has to offer?
Okay, Sadie raised her hand again. Would you like to share something?
Yes, okay, thank you.
Yes.
I have been working with the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs and at the University of Johannesburg. And and that is work that is done in the Vaal, which is one of the districts, one of the local municipalities here in South Africa. And it's based on identifying those citizen-led programs, and those development initiatives that were organic, that were developed by communities, and working with communities and the municipalities to create awareness of the asset-based perspective within those initiatives. And it has worked well. And with the municipality now, because what we were afraid of is that in most instances where government finds a good initiative in the community and government takes over, then it kills that initiative, and then it just goes to waste. So it was a way of trying to work with the local government to say where you find, or where we find, these community or citizen-led initiatives, they should rather be empowered, more empowered to to take the lead, rather than withdrawing because government is now coming on board. So, and that's where we started with engaging, both the local leadership in terms of the municipality and the community. And that in itself has actually contributed to more initiative from the community, and the community is actually initiating more action in terms of management of waste, where the municipality is not able to collect waste. The community has come together to find ways of making sure that their area stays clean. They identify those people who have got skills in maintenance and retired, maintenance officers, etc. And they begin to work together. And in that municipality, you've got both an area that is mainly your urban part, where you find most of the white people. But we have seen that there is actually working together instead of working in isolation, where the lessons drawn from one community are actually implemented in another community. So you begin to see a sense of working together. Thanks. Okay, I thought maybe time is over, so that's why I decided.
Oh, no, thank you so much, because I think it is important to hear about when do you want to turn something over to a local government structure that you think might be better funding, have the longevity, it's going to go forward. But yes, that they don't always have a stake in continuing that program. Have they taken it over to starve it and see it come to the wayside, or they don't have the expertise that community folks necessarily need and understand about their community. We are in our final 3 minutes.
Danielle, I'm just gonna Maya cross her question or their question. So from the quickest thing, and this is just the reality, what has helped us legitimize the need for asset-based community development strategies has been us tying in a racial equity component. And so when you look at why the system was created, it gives legitimacy to us saying that we know what's best for our community and ourselves. It's directly tied to our autonomy and us being able to take care of ourselves and do the work for ourselves. And so that's what's been able for us to leverage the language of asset-based community development in the work that we do. And so if you're working with populations in any way who have been marginalized or oppressed, look for ways and strategies to connect that directly in terms of your history and your stories, and how asset-based community development sets a better narrative. And it's always a transference of community-led and community-driven power is how we've been able to do that. And Danielle, can you speak to Steve's question about UNK, the tool we use to track and utilize asset-based data that we have?
I guess what kind of tool are you looking for? So we've used a couple of different approaches, whether it's photo voice, whether it's community mapping, whether it's community workshops, and then really one of the things that has been very helpful to us is that once we're working in a place-based way, being able to have locations with the stories has been a very powerful way of recording the information. So it's not a long list from a town hall meeting of different issues, which we still do, but people could actually say in this space, in this place. So it's harder to say that affordable housing is an issue, yes. But once I've started to put locations, once I can start layering other types of information and other stories where you can see those clusters, it becomes very powerful. So that's how we're recording a lot of that information, but it's fairly low tech. How are we mapping? We are mapping those resources by the storytelling that might be, people are dropping pins, they're telling us their stories, and then we'll link those stories back to the pin. So when you roll over the pin, you can see the story as it was told, as well as ways that maybe I'm not telling a story, I'm just showing this is an area where there used to be an asphalt plant, or there still is one. How do we make sure that data isn't pushed to the wayside, because a lot of the publicly available maps don't talk about brownfields or toxic land uses. So how can their data live with communities in partnership, live with at community town halls, and they know that they're being heard and recorded. But we are. I'm going to leave it to Cameron to tie.
Yeah, and we also share our data at the co-ops too, because those are times that we have community learning spaces. And so we do it at the town hall meetings, at the co-ops, and any time that the other community organizations engage with us. Also, when we do door-to-door listening, we let people know either bits of information if they ask questions based upon our last time coming, or we let them know about an event where they can actually learn the outcomes to the data that we've collected previously. Somebody's asking Danielle if we're able to share any of our map examples. Danielle and Kay, I'd love to see and share, but we'll get back with you guys on that if we're able to. I have to talk with Kay and Danielle about that. So, but if there's any final questions as we wrap this up, because it's 1 p.m. and we want to honor people's time, it might be 1:01. It's 1:02 at this point. So, we have any final thoughts or? They're asking, will there be a replay of this meeting available, Hannah? Is it going to be available?
Yep, so it has been recording, and I believe it will be available. So we'll be in touch, the conference team will be in touch after the fact with information on that.
Awesome, and we will do our due diligence to get like a resource list together, and just email it to you so you can email it. Everyone, I posted the website up there earlier. And if I can do it again right quick, but if you want to get in contact with me or Danielle or Kay, I'm gonna put our website up and my email, and just feel free to reach out to us, yeah, at any time.
All right.
Well, thank you, Kay, Cameron, and Danielle. Such a great discussion today, and appreciate your time and your wisdom and sharing. So thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.